All right, welcome back to Life Fit with DVD. Thanks for being here. Today, I wanted to talk about the deep end of things. Is anyone actually listening anymore? And, let's jump into it. You know, you've done the work, you've journaled, you've meditated, you've faced your shadows, right? You have a rich, complex inner world, and then you go out into the world or, open a social media app or something like that. And it just feels like you're talking into a void. The conversations are surface level, the interactions are transactional, and it just makes you wonder in a world that rewards likes, followers, quick takes on things, is depth of conversation, depth of opinion even valued anymore? Or are we just becoming a society of well branded ghosts and shells of ourselves? So, today we're going to look at why it feels so hard to connect, how the very tools promising connection are designed to prevent it, and most importantly, where can we go to actually find our tribe without selling our soul and performing? So, the system that we have right now in society is anti-depth, and so why does it feel that way? Well, we have social media platforms, news cycles, the consumer culture are not in the business of fostering self-awareness, contemplating things. They are in the business of capturing eyeballs, selling ads, with outrage, clickbaiting, all sort of things that are not designed to foster any sort of depth or nuance or authenticity. These are these are qualities that are terrible for this model because they're slow, they're complex, and it's not easily codified or commodified. Um, and ultimately, when we have these things, we have the depth, we have the self awareness, the authenticity, right? You go out into society, and you know society rewards just something radically different than what actually connects people. So there's three tools of shallowness here. So there's an illusion of connection. So likes and comments are a parody of intimacy sometimes, even though they might feel like you're connecting with somebody. They might give you a hit of validation without any of the risk of vulnerability or an effort of really relationship building and building rapport. Then you have the performance of self, right? These platforms encourage you to market a personal brand, but not really share your authentic self. The highs. They want the highs, but they don't want the lows. Well, sometimes they want the lows. But, it's not about, you know, anything in between, is what it comes down to. It's the highest highs and the highest lows, and the work that gets put into things, right? Your personal struggles, how you're feeling on a day to day basis. That's what people can relate to, but that's not what is typically rewarded. So you're curating a highlight reel, which forces others to ultimately do the same, and this creates a cycle of comparison and isolation. There's also the just tyranny of the timeline. So that's the endless algorithmic feed, which is always watching you, designed to keep you scrolling, not to encourage reflection, and it values what is new and reactive and often outrageous, not what is timeless and true. It sheds your attention span, making deep focus feel impossible. So, the cost of authenticity in the world of performers is ultimately exhausting. So for somebody that values depth, loves to just dig into things and feel things out, think deeply on them, you know, navigating the shallow social landscapes is, spiritually draining. It's a constant act of code switching, dimming your light, self censorship, that biting of your tongue to avoid being labeled as, too intense, too serious, or, just being a downer, uninteresting. This is why you feel so tired after, scrolling, or, if you're out in the world, parties, big gatherings. Um, you're actively preserving your energy against a draining force, or attempting to preserve energy against a draining force. But ultimately, the depth is a good thing, right? The fact that you feel this dissonance is not a sign that you're broken. It's a sign that the integrity is intact within you, and it needs to be cultivated. It acts as a natural filter, and it repels those who aren't ready for real connection yet, and it magnetizes those few people that are. The goal isn't to be liked by everybody, but it's to be deeply connected to the right people. So ultimately, how do we find deeper connections and areas where, when we value the self-awareness, the depth, the authenticity, where do we go, right? What is our path forward here? So, the principle is depth attracts depth, right? You will not find authentic connection often at bars, at parties, on social media for the most part, um, you know, by simply waiting for it, right? You must become the beacon for it. And this requires a shift from seeking and, trying to find a tribe to building and broadcasting for one. So you can lead with unflinching authenticity. So especially when it's hard, in conversations, dare to be the one that asks the real questions, right? How are you really, or why do you really think that? Where do you think that thought comes from? Are there any other possibilities that you've ever considered? Um, when you share a vulnerable truth about your own struggle, this also gives others implicit permission to do the same. It can be a gamble sometimes, but that can pay off with the right people. And if it doesn't, well, were they the right people for you in the first place? So curate your digital and physical spaces. So where to look. Small group settings, this can be niche message boards, men's groups, mastermind groups, book clubs. It could be workshop retreats. Things that are a little bit more intimate, shared, and build deeper engagement. Often, on a slower pace, is a gateway to connection. So I also mentioned it already, but there are online communities like the message boards. You know, leave the mainstream forums. Major comment sections or platforms. But seek out to these smaller areas, Discord servers. Or subscription-based communities that you already resonate with the messages of the people that have created the subscription, right? And center them around the deep interest in philosophy, conscious parenting, patterning, or a specific art form. But you can also volunteer as well, right? Going out into your community and participating in something you deeply care about already connects you with other people who share your values. But ultimately, it's important to embrace the one-on-one connection. The deep work of the connection rarely happens in a crowd. You need to prioritize, you know, the smaller gatherings, the coffee dates, the long walks, the phone calls without distractions, and quality is always better than quantity. And you might find it hard to prioritize these things in our crazy world that's constantly distracting us. But ultimately, this is about you and connection, and trying to find out what is really going to light your soul on fire without it being taken away and drowned out in the numbness of the algorithm. So, in conclusion, this is a quiet revolution, right? It's a shift in your own patterns and behaviors. The world might not value depth. It might not, behoove you to try to monetize depth at a mass scale, but that's because depth is rare and it's powerful, and it cannot be mass produced. It's cultivated in the quiet, in the brave choices to be real, when it's just so much easier to lie to yourself and others and be fake. So ultimately your mission is not to change the shallow world. The mission is to live from your own depth, and be that kind of beacon to be unapologetically yourself for others that are swimming in that deep end. So ultimately they will find you, but it might take more time, because when it takes more time, that's typically when you build the deeper, more authentic connections. So ultimately you have to look at this as the most radical act of rebellion is to know yourself deeply and to connect with others on that same level. So where do you feel the tension between your depth and your shallow world? If you're watching this, you probably have some depth to you, and you might feel misunderstood about yourself, and just you might see the world radically differently from other people, like I do as well. But I know that there's others out there, and I do connect with them. But at the same time, this is about building, right, and about being yourself and sharing it. So, if you are seeking a deeper connection below, let me know in the comments, where you see yourself diverging from other people. Do you feel very alone with your own voice out in the world? It'd be interesting to hear. And, if you're able to connect with others, how do you go about doing it? Where do you show up with your depth and your authenticity and connection? It'd be interesting to hear. So if this resonated with you, please like or subscribe, and I will be back next time with something new. Bye for now.